Hey, thank you so much for having me. Can someone confirm you can hear me? Yes? All right, excellent. It's a delight to come to South Africa through this Zoom call. I am in Mexico today. I'm originally from Mexico. I'm an artist who works with media art. In other words, I am a nerd and I like to mix different artistic disciplines. So I started as a scientist, as a chemist. But then as time went by, all my friends were writers and choreographers, musicians. They were so talented. And I didn't have a specific talent. So I became the director where I would tell them what to do in this technological theaters we would stage. And then gradually I started making a name for myself in the visual art world, where I make everything from sound and light shows to I've done Olympic ceremonies, I've done museums. So about half of what we do in my studio is artworks for museums and half is performances similar to what I'm about to show you. Today, I'm super delighted to present to you a project that was quite ambitious that we did at the Manchester International Festival. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and tailor the presentation to sort of talk about a lot of practical kind of logistical issues of, well, how does one get around to doing a project like this? And hopefully that'll be useful for the listener. What I'll do is, first of all, I'll share my screen, make sure that that's working. Can people confirm that they can see this? Yay. Okay, so real quick, I have a team. The team's actually grown to 25 people. I think of our practice very much as performing arts, where I'm the director, but then we also have like in theater, if you have a script writer or a choreographer or a musician, a composer, and so on, you put their names up in the program. In visual art, for some weird reason, we don't do that. We just hear the name of the artist and pretend that he or she is working alone. That's not the case. I always like to show the people that help me program and develop and engineer these works. And so you see their names here. We are proud to have parity in gender. So in terms of management, if you're working in a team, make sure that you have all genders included because this is evolutionarily correct. And then also in terms of international and more diverse group, we also try and make sure that the team is robust that way. So the project I'm going to present to you today is called Atmospheric Memory. The first thing we're going to see is the ad for it, okay? So bear with me, it takes about 1 minute. So here's the ad for it. So Atmospheric Memory is a project that seeks to make tangible the atmosphere that we breathe. It turns out that in the 19th century, there was an English inventor and polymath. His name was Charles Babbage, who in 1837, among many things, he invented the first mechanical computer, the difference engine, and then the first programmable computer, the analytical engine. And what Babbage said in 1837 is, what would happen if we had a computer that was so sophisticated that we could calculate the trajectory of each and every air molecule and rewind it in such a way that we could recreate all the voices of everybody who's spoken in the past? So to Charles Babbage, the atmosphere was a vast library that contained all the words and songs and extinct languages that had been spoken in the past. And Babbage imagined that in the future, we would be able to listen, for example, to the words of long lost loved ones, or extinct languages or songs, or in a really beautiful passage in the treatise where he writes this in the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise, he said, what would happen if we could find evidence of wrongdoing? And he specifically talks about slave owning in the 19th century, how people were getting away with murder, but that the atmosphere was recording every deed, every action. And in the future, we could seek justice for those those historical injustice by finding evidence in the atmosphere. So the project begins with this big idea from the 19th century, and then it's basically a succession of artworks and immersive pieces that seek to create a world where Charles Babbage was right, where we could eavesdrop into the atmosphere and listen to it. We have here an artwork called Atmosphonia, which is basically 3,000 loudspeakers. And each of the loudspeakers is playing a different a different field recording. So we have, for example, 300 different species of insects and 200 different bird species. And we have the sounds of wind and fire and water, but also the sounds of metronomes and bombs and children. And so the project, as you walk around, each one of those lights is a loudspeaker. And what you hear is unlike what anybody else hears, because even small movements of your head allow you to tune to a different sound of the atmosphere. So if like Babbage was suggesting, we could eavesdrop into all of the sounds of the past, what kind of cacophony would that sound like? And this is the project that tries to resolve that, to hear the universe of sound that could have been possible. So Atmosphonia is what we call an immersive artwork. In other words, it has no beginning or no end. It doesn't have a proscenium. It's more like a fountain, a constantly changing sound sculpture where you walk around to hear these sounds. Then you walk into a massive, massive place called the Chamber. And in the chamber, it's basically a set of artworks, which are projections and interactives, which, as you can see, a lot of kids are excited to be at the chamber in this particular video. But it consists of projections in the round. This is the entire contents of the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise written by Charles Babbage, as well as the translation done by Ada Lovelace, who famously wrote the first computer software in the 19th century. So this is collected works of Lovelace and Babbage. We have artworks, for example, that convert your voice into clouds of text. So for example, there's this microphone.
Nation.
She just said the word nation, and then the computer understands what you just said, and it converts it, it transcribes it using cold water vapor. So this is thousands of ultrasonic atomizers, which basically is a technology that you find inside of cold air humidifiers or aromatherapy devices. And we've created what we call a cloud display, which basically writes anything that people say onto it. And the spirit is this idea of, okay, let's take your voice and then let's try to see it ephemerally create a cloud in midair. So works like these are pieces which don't really exist unless people are participating. Participation is a big part of my work. So the project depends on people for it to exist. When there is no participation, we also have a little bit of what we call possessions, which are basically curated texts that appear in the machines, like the ghost in the machine, if you will. And some of the projects are modular. So for example, this project, which invited people to write stuff in midair, also became a crescendo. There was a last moment. I'm giving you away what happens. There's this moment where it becomes a waterfall of water vapor. So this is composer Philip Glass saying temporary. Anyway, so let me just show you real quick what happened. So closer to the end of the performance, the cloud display becomes a waterfall. It's important to note this is not a smoke machine. It's pure water vapor. It's just basically lifted by vibration. And so it's really good for your skin. It's really good for your lungs. This is not a toxic thing. And people enjoy very much losing sense of their boundaries and engaging with the fog. Of course, there's big traditions of fog in art. Fumio Nakaya was an artist, or is an artist. She's still alive. She's in her 90s, I believe, out of Japan, who famously makes sort of steam and water vapor sculptures. So respectful to those traditions of experimentation, we're also making our own, in our case, computerized, interactive water features that take over the space. So this is an example of one of the artworks in atmospheric memory. There's many. I'm not going to show you all of them so that we have a bit of time for discussion if you guys want. But this is Brian Eno, the musician, and he said pickle, and then he's saying taxivation, because we're asking people to say things that they want to see disappear. He wants taxivation to disappear. So a few other artworks. For example, this one converts your voice into controlling 100 anemometers. So these are computerized fans that make these brass kinetic, weather vanes move around. And so depending on what you say and who else is speaking, you create this turbulence of air that you can view. And again, it's all about how do we become aware of our voice in impacting onto our atmosphere. And I'm not going to give it all away, but here's another piece. This is Marina Abramovic saying tsunami, and her voice becomes waves, which then get expanded over the entire place.
Atmospheric.
Let me fast forward. Another artwork is we invited 6 actors to speak the 9th Bridgewater Treaties, but we put down their throats an endoscope to be able to view their vocal cords as they're speaking.
Demonstrated to exist by human reason, and in some few and limited instances, by calling.
So this is the vocal folds, the way in which we actually actuate the air to create our voice is captured on film here with an endoscope. And this little orchid, we all have one of these, and it was a cute scene because we had the actors come for the audition, and they all came with photos, and they were all very well dressed and whatever. We said, we don't care about what you look like. We want to go inside of your body, through your nostril and into your vocal cords and record that. And that was a really, some people find it gross. I find it fascinating that our biology meets the atmosphere through this extremely delicate instrument that makes the air vibrate and our voices to stay in the room. I think I have a couple more examples. The project itself was made in a bespoke chamber that was built just for it out of containers. Over 50 shipping containers were made, were sort of put together to create the chamber. But of course, we're now showing this also in theaters, and we're showing it in different kinds of facilities. And the project includes some historical artifacts. For example, in Manchester, we had a portion of the actual analytical engine on view. We have, for example, the first edition of the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise on view. We have phantasmagoria slides and devices from the 19th century to capture sort of this idea that the project is a hybrid between new media, but also a historical reference to the past. So there were shadow plays, there were a lot of people hanging out, watching the display over a period of, now it's 40 minutes, all of the projection cycle. And not to give it away, but the project in the end becomes a very environmental project. Where we're talking about, well, what is the memory of the atmosphere? And the memory of the atmosphere is the 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide that are accumulating and that are, constituting a real extinction event due to climate change and extinction events. So the project becomes a warning about not taking the atmosphere for granted. Remember that the Industrial Revolution that to an extent Charles Babbage helped automate is in fact part of the culprit for this particular condition that we have with climate change. Likewise, there's a moment in the project where everything becomes a massive surveillance device, because basically the project is saying, if everything that we say is recorded, would we want that? Would we want a world in which, as Babbage predicted, everything is recorded in the atmosphere? And the answer is today, we live in a world where our televisions and our phones and our computers are constantly on tracking our every move, where there's a complete digital profile of what we say, to whom we say it, for how long we have a relationship. And so the project becomes a little bit dystopian about a society in which everything is recorded. So for example, the project has 12 cameras, which then are trained on the public, and then it shows the images of the public. And the idea with doing that is to also be a bit critical, not to use technology only to buy into the whole sort of novelty and originality myth, which is a myth, but rather tie it to traditions of military, police, and corporate control that are used. And so this project is complicated because it's not just a celebration of technology. It's also, a critical approach on our civil liberties, about systems of control, about systems of data. There's some projects which are, this is a nanotechnology project where we embedded the book written on 2 million pamphlets that are 150 atoms thick, and we release them onto the atmosphere as well so that people can breathe the book, the original book. We have machine, now I'm just showing you machines. I see I have time, so I'll show you some more of the works in there. This is basically the breath of Pauline Oliveiros, who is an American composer and accordionist who believed very much in deep listening and believing that there's no such thing as a quiet atmosphere. So we took her breath and we connected it to this respirator. And she died about 4 years ago, but her breath is still circulating in this machine forever. 10,000 times a day, that brown paper bag inflates and deflates. And her breath is kept alive by this strange machine that we developed at the studio, like a respirator. And this is the moment I was telling you about, where the cameras start training on the public. So all of a sudden, the public realizes that they themselves are the subject. They themselves are the content of the artwork. A project called Zoom Pavilion begins, which is a project I did in collaboration with a Polish artist called Krzysztof Wodiszko. And basically, it measures not just where you are, but the distance between you and other people that are in the room. So it constantly scans the room, and it determines whether your distance to them is suspicious or not. It turns out that Wojtyszko grew up in communist Poland. And in communist Poland, when he was a kid, it was illegal for people to assemble in public space. More than 3 people joining in public space for a specified amount of time was seen as a civil offense. So what we did is we took the rules of this kind of assembly and computerized them, especially at this time of social distancing. We wanted to sort of have track of how people behaved in this space and create a very Orwellian kind of dystopian view of this technology and how robustly it seeks to track us. And what's curious about these tracking systems is that often people, because of selfies and reality TV, there is this desire to be included, to participate, to feel like you're part of the action. So people find this quite often enjoyable, to see themselves up high in the screens and relating to each other, which is interesting. The other half of the public sees it more as a really ominous, problematic, almost military technique that, rids you of your privacy and makes certain stereotypes about your gender or your race, your identity, come to the fore. And so my work, a work like Atmospheric Memory, is exactly in that boundary between the seduction of participation and the violence of a digital system, a digital backbone that cannot be turned off, and that is constituting the field for all of our interactions, be it economical or in terms of relationships, war. So that's Atmospheric. I'm going to just stop there and note that I did well with time. I want to mention that a project like Atmospheric Memory is a project that was a co-commission. Manchester International Festival was the main commissioner and where the project was premiered, and it's also the institution that is touring the project around the world. But a project like this comes with the help of a lot of different institutions. So we worked, for example, with Future Everything, which is a local Manchester media art organization, with the Science Museum, where the project took place, with Arsenal Contemporary out of Montreal, which helped us develop some of the shows on view. And then as the project tours, different types of supporters, government, and private sponsors come in to help us present a project like this. The project is a timed entry. So in other words, you're given a time to go in. Not unlike, I'm sure you must have this in South Africa. There is a real contagion of shows, of Van Gogh shows, immersive shows, where you go in and you see something that you've already seen a million times. Well, it's like that. You go in at a certain time, but you can stay as long as you want and peruse the different interactive artworks. It's just that, contrary to, say, the Van Gogh shows, where you're given something that you already know, in Atmospheric Memory and in my work in general, I try to create a little bit more of a disruption, so that when you're going to these projects, there is that moment for Instagram, there is that moment of fascination with large scale, but at the same time, there is some intellectual, robustness, that there's some lubrication of your brain, right? I think very much in terms of a saying that the Zapatista Rebellion has here in Mexico. I don't know if you all know. The Zapatistas are a group that started in the 90s here, mostly indigenous people, trying for people to address, historical injustices in this country. And one of their slogans, which I like very much, is, we are not asking you to dream. We're asking you to wake up. And I really like this quote in the context of Atmospheric Memory, because a lot of times these immersive shows want to create these little bubbles of comforting and comfortable respite from our daily routines. Whereas what I want with these immersive shows is that they make you aware or alert or uncomfortable about certain things that are taking place in the real world. So the king of this, of course, is Bertoro Brecht, and this incredible playwright and author is somebody who showed us that through theater, we must address some of these social issues, that theater cannot just be a comfortable, lounge chair to relax. It has to be a place of action. It has to be a place of understanding your own complicity with what you denounce. And so I really felt that it was important to bring into a project like these subjects of environmental and digital environments. The project was made by my team, but together with local developers. So for example, on the subject of how long a project like this takes to come together, the answer is 5 years. So I started talking to the curator, Jose Luis Vicente, 5 years before the project was presented. And we had a number of ideas about how to use music with this project. We had been working with Jóhann Jóhannsson, an incredible Icelandic composer, had a number of meetings with him, and I really studied his work deeply. It was going to be a project that would bring together Jóhannsson's music with the concept of atmospheric memory. But unfortunately, during the whole production, Jóhann passed away, he died. And the project is now dedicated to his memory. And even though in the end we did not have enough of his music, we had a variety of different composers involved, like Hélène Radig as a French composer. So you have to think about the music, you have to think about the space architecturally, you have to think about the curation. At the end of the performance, there's a lot of local activists who speak, because we don't want to make it a bummer, right? Like, we don't want the whole project to be depressing. We also want to hear the Greta Thunbergs of the world, and we want to hear, the voices that are committed, that are helping us think about the world differently and are engaging us all, galvanizing us into action. So the voices are curated by local curators who help us then make the project also not just be a UFO, but something that engages with the local community. So in University of North Carolina, where we presented this project in the States, we worked with 4 PhD students interested in social justice, interested in the environment, interested in, well, what is the atmosphere trying to tell us today? So I think with that, I should stop and then hopefully engage with some questions. I love to speak about complicated taboo subjects like money and logistics and shipping, but we could also talk about more technological things if there are nerds out there, how we do this, what kind of computers we use, what kind of robots, that kind of stuff is really close to me. Or finally, if somebody wants to do something more about the historical or aesthetic, I'd be happy to take questions on that too. So choose aesthetics, technology, or social justice. So I don't know if there's a moderator who can...
Yes, I'm here. I feel like we usually think that with conversations, people must be in the room, but after seeing your work, I think we can all agree that it feels right to have it via technology. So Rafael, thank you so much. Apologies for mispronouncing your name earlier. I'm really, really intrigued by your practice. And especially this idea that the atmosphere is recording everything we say. And this idea that art can make interventions that not only shows us the world, but implicates us in it and invites us to think about how we're participating in the world. And that we can seek justice through the evidence of the atmosphere. I wanted to ask you about the seed of this project, because I also love that you've shown us the community that makes up the artwork. And I think that in my work as an arts journalist, increasingly I've found that art is made in community, whether that's artists in conversation with each other or the actual construction. So I really did love that you showed us that. Where did the seed of this idea begin?
In fact, it did through dialogue. So Jose Luis de Vicente, the curator, is a dear friend. It's a Spanish curator out of Barcelona. We were talking, he was at Future Everything, and we were talking about how so much of new media pretends to be about the future and how uninteresting the future is to us when we're living through an extinction event that's catastrophic in terms of climate change. And, just curious about whether we could look into history and into the history of media itself to create something that was a little bit more pertinent to our times. And I have long been studying Babbage because Babbage, as I said, was the originator of the mechanical calculator and the programmable computer in the 19th century. And I've been very interested by this figure. And then when I discovered the Ninth Bridgewater Treatise, it was clear that this is what we needed to do, is this imagination of the world as this mechanism that was never forgetting. It's also very Mexican. I mean, it was kind of weird. Is this idea that you coexist with all these different realities, and that when I'm speaking to you, it's not just you and I speaking, it's everybody that I have read and listened to, talking to everybody that you have read and listened to, is what Mikhail Bakhtin calls intersubjectivity. So it was just coming out of those discussions, and then gradually was meant to be more of a show, but then gradually, in part because of Johann's passing, it became more of a walkthrough, and now it's really like an archipelago. It's basically, we can, for example, we just installed it in a theater, in a 2,000-seat theater, where Atmosphonia, the very first artwork that you saw with the loudspeakers, that's actually all in the seats, in the theater seats, whereas the chamber is actually on the stage. So you go into the stage to go see it. So now the need for the massive chamber is no longer so fundamental. We can break the project into its constituent parts. And the honest truth is that the project will keep evolving as it gets presented, because we learn, each time that we present it, we learn something.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I'm sure that some of you will have questions. I want to let you know that before you state your question, please make sure you have a microphone so Rafael can hear you. We apparently have some questions from the WhatsApp line. Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So, hi, Rafael. We have a number of questions. I will read 2 or 3, and then we'll go into live, and then we'll come back to the WhatsApp. So the first question from Kumisa. Kumisa is part of our cohort for our Cultural Producers Program, and she asks, what have you learned about exhibition from observing children, and have they offered any critical feedback based on their unlimited understanding? The next one asks, what are the ethical questions that come up in your production process, especially when you showcase something like the last breath of someone to an audience to consume? And then our third and final question, they have 2 here. They say, how does one go about drawing up a proposal for an installation project? And what other things you have learned when it comes to installation that would help unknown installation artists? Software, hardware system were used in the light atmospheric installation. Thank you.
Okay. With those 3 questions, I can do about 3 hours. I'll try and keep it short. I'm a father of 3, and my kids are incredibly useful as test subjects for most of my projects, because they press every button. They are not shy to try and break things. It's almost their job to see if the installations are robust. Children are expansive. Children are, there are uncontrollable phenomena that are like fields that take over an artwork and make it bloom. Children have not been taught so many of the constraints that we as adults have and misbehave in a beautiful way that helps the artwork have some freedom. So when children come to my artworks, I find improvisation, and I find energy, and I find a real sense of dialogue happening. There's also this phenomena where it depends if the child is alone, is with their parents, or if the child is with a group of peers, then it's a completely different energy. Working with children has been very fascinating. Works like this, also not to talk down to them, right? Like I find that so many of the artworks or theme parks or immersive things speak to the children as if they were idiots. Children are enormously complex and capable of really complex ideas. And so presenting the material, even if it's, shocking or difficult, is fundamental to me, to not speak down to them. And then I'll mention also, because it was mentioned at the beginning, that the project was also really interested in accessibility. The children, for example, have a form factor that needs to be taken into account. So our intercoms were too high. The children could not access the microphones that were there, the same as a person with a wheelchair. So among the things that we did is we brought in intercom microphones that were lower for people who were, lower height. So you learn things like that as you put a project into the presentation. Another thing that I should mention is both for children and for different types of able people, we had relaxed sessions. This meant that you could book a ticket for a presentation that was not super loud with flashing lights and with big volume, but rather a calmer kind of presentation, so that if you are sensitive to light or if you're sensitive to sound, you could come into a presentation of the project where it was slightly toned down. So this is things that you do to accommodate the variation of experience that people can take. Then on the subject of the ethical question, this is a great and important question, is of course, taking the breath of Pauline Oliveiros was not done without her consent. And a very important thing about this project is to understand the humor in the project, right? So Pauline Oliveiros was a teacher. She was a mentor for many of us. She was somebody who had also a sense of humor, right? Like the call was, Pauline, can we capture your breath in this fried chicken brown paper bag and keep it stored forever and circulating in this machine? And she says, that's such a stupid idea. And I was like, yes, exactly. It's a very dumb idea. Let's do it. Because art should not only be good ideas, right? Like good ideas in art, they're all taken. You need to explore some uselessness in order to be able to evoke and galvanize somebody's brain. So in the case of Pauline Oliveiros, many people may not know her, but through this work, they may learn about her concept of deep listening. And ultimately, the piece speaks about a fragility, and this senseless attempt to keep us alive. Montaigne said that to philosophize is to learn how to die. I think artwork is similar. We're trying to remember, we're only here for a little time. So I think the spirit of a piece like Last Breath, in terms of ethical questions, is consent. So the number one question or issue with ethical issues is consent. And so that not only did we also have her complicity in making this project happen. And then on the subject of on the subject of proposals or how to get to work in this big scale, I want to introduce this word vectorial. I think vectorial work is very important. What I mean by vectorial is that a lot of what I do is in fact beginning with an idea or with a desire to make a particular effect in the world. And oftentimes when I had no money, like I'm just like any other artist, I made websites and, whatever to support myself over time, it started, my practice started getting traction. But initially what I would do is I would make things at scale. So the prototype, your initial prototype, any idea that you have, you can make it into a very small thing, and then just count on the technology being able to amplify the size, to be able to sort of imagine this work taking over an entire building. So I would develop small pieces that could be a proof of concept, if you want, a prototype, or what they call it in the contemporary art world, an artist proof. And then that, you can imagine it with a vectorial amplification. So for example, a projection. So something that happens in a really inexpensive little screen, you can now imagine it. Well, what would that look like if this were 12 meters wide by 8 high? Then that's just a question of being able to secure the funding for a projection, which is not an easy question, of course. It's a very difficult question. But thinking of the work as this kind of more viral treatment, think of the work not as an object or as something that is locked into a scale, but as a treatment that can be amplified vectorially to take over a large scale. That's how we've done a lot of the work, is always thought very, very small, but always with the sights of, well, how can we amplify this so that thousands of people can experience the piece?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think that the way you've expanded on these questions is so illuminating, especially on this question of the ethics of art and consent, but also humor, and the many different layers that go into the making of an artwork. We're going to turn to a question that comes from in the room. Could you please say your name and your question?
Hi, my name is Uvile. I am currently working on curating a performance exhibition. It's in a house space, like a former mansion, and it's kind of like the whole upstairs area of that space. The first question that I have is regarding utilizing basic like parkan lights, because those are the only lights that are available in that particular space. If you have any advice on creative ways to play around with that. And we also can't rig them. So it's literally parkan lights from the floor, from tables or spaces like that. So I'm trying to consider kind of creative ways to play with that, because we are low budget, not what we just saw now. And then the second thing is that the performance exhibition is part of a conference series, talks, that kind of thing. So it's on one day, and they're looking at themes of repair and loss and grief, and quite heavy content that's going to be covered in each respective piece or installation. So I wanted to know how you have in the past, or how you navigate things like debriefing the people that come into the space, especially if you're dealing with heavier kind of content. Do you include that within your installation process if you do that? Or how do you engage if people are moved in unexpected ways by a work because of its content?
Cool. I think these are great questions, and I love that there was a technical one as well. Rafael?
That's right. Thank you so much for those questions. Those are really great. On the subject of parkans, you should know that my practice is what I call perverting technological correctness. So technological correctness, not unlike political correctness, is this desire to pretend that there is only one way forward. And of course, there's a plurality of ways forward. I think perverting technological correctness means to be extremely proud of the, of the affordances that each technology can give. A parkan is an incredible piece of technology. I'm going to share with you real quick one project done with extremely inexpensive lights, because I think it's going to help. Can you confirm you can see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So this is a pulse sensor, and this is a light bulb, and this is me. And so I'm measuring, this is me when I still had hair and I was thin. And this is me, and it's measuring my heartbeat, and it's adding it to an array. This is in a room. And it's basically a polar sensor. This sensor itself costs about $15 to buy. It's a Mac Mini computer. And then there is these light bulbs which are reacting to the heartbeat. This is done with a thing called a DMX dimmer, so a digital dimmer. And I'll tell you very specifically which ones you should get. And what happens is these are just light bulbs which represent the heartbeats of different participants. So here's my friend who drinks a lot of Red Bull. This is what happens to your body when you drink Red Bull. Boom, 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 boom. And then everybody who adds their heartbeat, as you can see, pushes the previous recordings down one position. Here comes a curator who thinks we're going to electrocute everybody. So what happens inside of the heart of a curator? It's like this. He's freaking out. And then once 100 people participate, the entire room is bathed by the heartbeats of the past 100 people. And very importantly, once 101 participate, your own heartbeat disappears from the room like a memento mori, reminding us that we're here only a very little time. So the reason I'm showing you this is because this was done in an exhibition which had tiniest of budgets. And it's actually my most successful work so far. This is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's in so many museums around the world. And I'm super proud of the economy of a project like this. So to make a project like that, what you want is a DMX. There's many, but I'm gonna show you the one that we used, is this little thing. So this is a digital dimmer, and you basically connect anything onto this little socket right here. And then through a protocol called DMX, which is a pretty now inexpensive protocol for control, you can actually shape or control each light bulb individually. The reason I'm showing you this is because what I'm imagining, imagine if you have parkans and you're saying that you're in some kind of mansion. This mansion can be completely automated, or you can create effects, everything from, with your parkans, you can do effects such as, for example, like lightning, or you can do like weird illuminated, furniture inside where, this illumination is animated. Or you could, for example, any kind of ghost-like production can be done with those parkans. Or more importantly, because you have parkans, you can illuminate objects. So then it's very interesting, because if you're animating your light, say that you had a text, well, the text can be matched to the actual parkans. So you walk into this room, there's the parkans everywhere, they're turned off. But then the text or the song or the story starts happening, and one of the parkans lights up a particular painting, only that painting. And now you have everybody's attention going to this painting. Or you illuminate a hole in the ground that looks suspicious, and you are telling now a story about this hole in the ground. So a parkan is an immensely useful device, so long as you can use it elegantly and clinically. And to control it is no longer a very expensive undertaking. So DMX controllers now go for, a 24-channel DMX controller will cost you about $80. So, you can have 24 parkans illuminated, with that investment. So that's on parkans. And then on the subject of content, I want to share with you that in atmospheric memory, there is a moment where everything is going well and it's all beautiful, but then there is an actual shutdown that we've programmed. It's part of the sequence of events that happens in atmospheric memory, where all of a sudden all the machines fail, and where all of a sudden the projection of the text of Charles Babbage speaking about seeking for social justice for enslaved people through the evidence of wrongdoing in the atmosphere is projected, this text, followed by the voice of Eric Gardner, who's famously one of many Black people who have been, beaten to death in the United States by the police. And he, in his voice, in this recording, what you hear is, "I can't breathe." And you hear it clearly, and it becomes almost the chant of our time. I can't breathe due to the systemic violence and racism of the police officers, but it's also, I can't breathe due to, any number, especially environmental or in addition, environmental issues that are going to make this the chant of our time. I can't breathe. So I'm sharing this because it was an enormously difficult thing to decide to include the voice of Eric Gardner into the piece. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is, as we're working with this material, we need to be respectful. We need to make sure that this material is not being used gratuitously, that it's not exploitative or opportunistic. These are very difficult things to avoid, and I'm not sure if I managed to do it. But when erring on the side of caution, I decided to include the material because I think that the work itself needs to be a little bit larger than the issues of the 19th century or the issues of the environment or digital digital life or digital proceedings. It has to be about the social justice. And the way that we did it is connecting it through Babbage's own text about how the atmosphere will record. Well, now we record some of these, not all of them, but some of these events are recorded. And so it's about the idea of being able to have consequences, for those kinds of evidence that is coming out. So on using these trickier, sometimes darker, sometimes more adversarial techniques, I think that one must be prepared when going into an artwork for that to happen. And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't elicit a sense of rage and you think it's all pretty, then the artist has failed. You should be able to, when treating these subjects, to elicit some anger and some discomfort, because otherwise you're really just beautifying and memorializing, which is not good enough. In my opinion, we need to seek action. Having said all of that, I think I'm bullshitting a little bit. I'm myself trying to figure out what the best way to do this. I can tell you one thing that's really problematic is using the public itself. So what I do is when you go into one of these artworks, I always say something along the lines of, you're about to enter an artwork that consists of cameras, microphones, and sensors. And by entering, you're giving your consent for the material recorded to be used as content for the artwork itself. So long as you're upfront about that, I think that it is fair game. You're now entering with the knowledge that the artwork is listening and seeing you and sensing you, and that the artwork is going to use that material for the presentation itself. So that's how I would deal with that particular thing. But in terms of the difficult content, I think the difficult content just needs to be there, period. And if it produces a sense of anxiety, that's just the working.
Mm-hmm. So do we have any further questions? Okay.
Mic on? Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Tobile, and I manage a film festival that has been running annually for the past 18 years, but I've managed it for 7 years. What I want to know is, okay, I'll just give a little background history of the festival. It's a festival for aspiring filmmakers and also well-established filmmakers. And it's happening in KZN. We give platform to African filmmakers. And we've brought into, it's located in Guamashu, so we brought Hollywood into Guamashu. We brought Gabriela Union, Halle Berry, Danny Glover, just to name a few. But the challenge that we have is that the festival is not growing. It's growing in terms of the number of years of existing, but in terms of audience development, it's stable. It's just the same number of audience. Doesn't matter who you're bringing into the country in order to attract more audience. So I want to know what could be maybe strategies that you could share with us for us to attract bigger audience, right audience, which are filmmakers and film lovers, to come to the festival, because the festival isn't growing. This year is going to be for the 19th year, but we sort of know who is going to be at the festival because it's always the same people. And even with the local filmmakers, some that we invite, you get that they'll hear about the festival only when they get the invitation. So somewhere, somehow, there's something that we're not doing right, but we can't really figure out what is that. Thank you.
These are really, really great questions, and I feel like they're going to help everybody else in their practices too. Rafael?
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar problem than you in the sense that in my work, if the public is not coming, the project does not exist. So it's humbling, right? If you're a painter, you can paint for yourself, and many of my friends do, and they're satisfied with it. They're not really interested in they don't have a need for the public, you know, they don't care, which is great. It's a great freedom. But when you are like you with your festival, or me with this big, you know, super expensive productions, you really need, you know, 100 people coming through each hour because you got to pay for the subway. And I don't, of course, I have no lessons to teach because I'd never been to South Africa, so I don't know the potential publics that are there. What I do personally is I take very seriously the role of media, and I do a lot of presentation about the work that is not as in-depth as what I just gave you guys, right? So if you look at the very, very first clip that we showed is 1 minute, and it shows a lot of images and it has a couple of questions, but we try and take a lot of the meat, a lot of the critical, political, social, historical meat out of that, because what we want to do is we want to capture a more general public who then might be contaminated by some of these ideas. So we do care to make the presentations in the media more intelligible. Try to I say things like, this is for everybody, you know, like, who is this for? It's like, it's for everyone. It's true that the nerds will get more out of it, but we engage with the media a lot. And one of the things that we do with this kind of project is outreach. So, for example, in Manchester, we did a lot of schools, and we brought a lot of schools engaged with the project. So we made them little maquettes that they could play with in their classrooms and stuff like that. And then everything from 10-year-olds to 18-year-olds would become kind of ambassadors to the project. And crucially, these kids who now felt they had a seat at the table, and that they're being considered, and that the project was for them, and that they were the ambassadors of the project, they grow up and then eventually get into positions of power. So I don't know what the dynamic of demographics is in South Africa, but here in Mexico, working with kids is an enormously successful way to grow your field, because in Mexico we have so many kids. So, and they're all curious and they want to do things. So the older people, they had their chance. It's in the youth that we can seek to grow our publics. And so in Manchester, that outreach really helped. And then the same with workshops, for example. So I did a number of tours for example, specifically for other artists or for nerds. So this kind of very tailored, multi-dimensional sort of approach to grow the public of the project was really important for it to survive. And yeah, that's it. That's all I can say from my practice.
Cool. Thank you, Rafael. We can take one more question, which we're going to take from our WhatsApp line.
All right. Hi, Rafael. This question is very simple from Siwa, one of our other cohort members. And he asks, how much did this project cost?
No, it's a great question, and I'm not shy to talk about that. So the project is very costly. It's very costly mostly because of the type of technologies that were used. So we had an original investment that is, I don't know, it's over $1 million to create this project. In part is because we also needed to build a venue. So there was no venue big enough to hold it at that time. So we had to build a venue, which was a substantial amount. Then there was all of the projections and all of the technologies and so on. It's interesting to me to think, though, about the economics of this as something that is variable itself. So it's a paradoxical thing. When you have something that is this massive, you're also usually engaging more of your public, right? You can get more people per hour coming through and seeing the work. So paradoxically, making something that's very big sometimes is financially more feasible than something that is very small. But the vectorial question that I answered before applies to budget too. The only reason it was so big, as I said, is because we built the venue and we wanted, 15-meter tall projections. But this very same project can be done for 1/10 of that if it were to be done in a smaller venue. So it's an interesting problem. Like I said, I'm hoping that when showing you the project of Paul's Room, which was a project that was made with about $5,000 budget, people don't get enamored only by the massive budget, right? The massive budget is something that I'm very lucky and privileged to have been able to access. And certainly I want to make that money back for the festival and for all of the investors. But I'm not going to do that if we need to dumb down the project at all. And that's part of the problem with doing huge things, is that when you do huge things, you now have a budget and your sponsors want to control the content or something like that. I want to tell you that Manchester International Festival never, ever either censored or controlled the content at all. They gave me an opportunity to really work with some freedom inside of those budgets, and I have to commend them for that. There's not many institutions in the planet that could do that. I should also mention that, again, the money came from a variety of sources: government sources, public sources, private sources. So it's that's basically it. I mean, from where I sit, I used to say that my work is as big as my insecurities. So I would always want to get the biggest projector in the world and the biggest venue and whatever. But now I go to psychotherapy and I'm okay with small things. Little thing over in the side, so long as it's effective, this is okay too. So I encourage people to not be fixated on the budget question, because, it's not always the case that bigger is better.